Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Starlight Archive, best Griffin High Republic podcast this side of Brendock. Today we are finishing off our Wave 1 spoiler-full episode, so if you haven't read Wave 1 and you don't want to, then this is the place for you. And if you haven't read Wave 1 and you do want to, you should probably avoid this until you've actually finished it.
Or go backwards. Listen, read, listen. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you should listen to us first and then read it with your newfound understanding of the greater area. I don't know, but we're going to be talking about a lot today. We're actually talking about the Starlight Stories, which all appeared in Star Wars Insider magazine. And we're going to be talking about the Coruscant Solstice story that appeared in Star Wars Life Day Treasury.
Ooh, we all love some Life Day.
We do love some Life Day and all other holiday celebrations, and then Star Wars holiday celebrations. And then, of course, we're going to be finishing off our time with the first Wave 1 comics, which appear in the first trade paperbacks of Star Wars High Republic and Star Wars High Republic Adventures. So if you missed our last 3 episodes, you should probably go listen to those. But if you want us to just give you a quick rundown, then here you go. So there was this accident that happened in hyperspace, and the hyperspace accident caused the ship to go flying out of hyperspace, but at random places throughout the entire galaxy called emergences. And the emergences were going toward planets, and the Jedi had to stop them from actually happening. And they were like, we don't know what happened to hyperspace. And when we found out that was actually happening to hyperspace, we realized that it was because of this group of people called the Nihil. And the Nihil are a group of marauders that live in space, in the middle of no space, which is this kind of area that like is kind of impossible to get to, but isn't impossible to get to. It's kind of weird. I don't know. It's a floating platform. It's a
whole thing. We'll get there later.
Dome. We'll get there later. So they're living out there. It turns out they were the ones that caused the disaster. And then the pieces started flying off into nowhere, and they had to find a way to stop them. So in order to not into nowhere. The pieces started emerging out of hyperspace, and they were flying toward a planet, and they had to stop them somehow. And so they used these crazy cable system, and they did so with the help of a couple named Joss and Pikka. And before we go into further what's going on in the rest of that story, we should probably talk about that story. So that story is called Go Together. So Joss and Pikka in the first 2 Starlight stories that appeared in Star Wars Insider magazine.
Yes.
They're a couple. They just want to go on vacation. That's all they want.
They've had a long time working on this huge space station, making sure everything's put together properly and the power's running properly.
Did they help build the Starlight Beacon?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So anyways, this story was written by Charles Soule. It's split into 2 parts, which is kind of cool. And he noted that the first part is technically chapter 0 to Light of the Jedi.
Oh,
because it happens way before all that.
Because that's when they end with Go Together.
Yes.
Okay, so before Light of the Jedi.
Yes.
So before everything I just said, Joss and Pikka are working on Starlight Beacon.
Yep, and they're all done.
And they're all finished.
Yeah,
they're finished. Like, finally time for freaking vacation.
Yeah, they're packed up, they're ready to go, and they're getting ready to tag along on the ship back to Coruscant with some Jedi and a couple of dignitaries, and then Pikka notices that there's some weird readings on her datapad. And it's super distracting. She can't figure out what's going on, but she knows that she needs to go fix it. And Joss is like, let's just go on vacation. Somebody else will take care of it. It's fine. But they both know that no one else is going to find it in time because they found it right now. And due to where it is, it'll pretty much shut down power to the entire station.
She's like, this is a huge problem. We have to do it.
Yeah.
And he's like, but we could just go on vacation. Somebody else can fix it. It's not technically our job anymore.
Yeah. And she's like, it's a quick, easy fix. We know what it is. We probably know how to fix it. We just got to go find it, take care of it. So they get going, and then they run into a couple of Jedi and some other people from the Senate.
And they're like, hi, how do you do? How do you do? Hi, how do you do? How do you do? How do you do?
Yeah. So basically, one of the administrators, oh, it is there. Cool, found it. One of the administrators that's going around with Admiral Kronara as well, and the Jedi, they're like, hey, you worked on the station. We're kind of on a tour on our way back to the ship.
Oh, no.
Why don't you just come join us for the tour? And they're like, oh, well, we got to go pack, because we don't want to let them know that, like, there's an issue that they need to go take care of.
Yeah, we don't want to cause a panic. We need to go fix this problem.
Yeah. So,
play it cool, and then we can go on vacation.
And the administrator's like, no, this is your station. You're more qualified to give this tour than I am. And luckily, we have Nibasik. So she's there with Barryaga, who's the best, and they're noticing that like something's up. And especially Barryaga, because he's this
super empathic,
super force empath guy, and he's like kind of nudging his master, like, "Hey, they need to go take care of something." And so luckily she steps up. She's like, "You know what? They've worked hard. Let them go get their suitcases. They are going to come with us on the ship back to Coruscant, but let's just let them do their thing for now." And so they're like, "Oh, thank God, thank the Force." And so they run off, and it turns out that there's a power conduit has some faulty wiring, and it's right next to the Starlight Beacon's Jedi Temple.
Oh.
Because, again, we haven't really gone into it too much. Maybe that could be a future episode of what exactly is all on this Starlight Beacon, because it's both a partial Jedi Temple and a Republic outpost, a floating outpost.
Yeah.
A mobile outpost. So they're like, okay, we need to fix this, especially, near the Jedi Temple. So they go, and eventually they do fix it, because they're badasses like that. They eventually get their stuff, and they're ready for vacation, and they're on the ship back to Coruscant when Pikka writes up the incident report, like, "Hey, we found a wiring issue, we fixed it, it's all good." He sends it off, and they're kind of lounging around the ship where Admiral Kronara is with the rest of that crew that they found taking the tour. And then, separately, Kronara comes on to the intercom system and is like, "Hey..."
Oh, I can read it right now if you'd like.
Okay, sure.
She comes onto the intercom and she says, "This is Admiral Kronara. We have received a distress signal from the Hetzal system regarding a system-wide mass casualty event.
Oh, no.
We are close enough to divert to offer assistance. Any passengers with piloting rescue or emergency medical experience willing to aid in the relief effort, please make yourself known to a crew member." And then it falls silent, and Pikka felt the third horizon drop from hyperspace, and she had no idea what a system-wide mass casualty event could be. But whatever it was, the important thing was that it was system-wide, and that means billions of lives, and there's no other way to interpret it. Mm-hmm. And Joss is like, "We gotta go.
We gotta go." Yeah.
And she's like, "I know, I can't argue this." So Pikka didn't even try to dissuade him. They could both fly a ship, and they had all sorts of training that could be useful in a crisis. So she just looks at him, and she nods, and she says, "I love you. Let's go." Ugh.
Yeah. Time to go to work.
Time to go to work.
And they
again.
did.
And then they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's when we get Go Together Part 2.
Yeah. So smash cut through the rest of Light of the Jedi.
So yeah, all the things are happening. Big explosion. Things are flying out of space. We're trying to stop things from flying into, suns and stuff. All the things that happened in the first episode of our spoilery thing. You could go back and listen to that if you'd like, or just listen to the fast version. And then they start going, "Hey, this is way bigger than just the few Jedi in the area can handle it. We need to do way bigger things. So start calling everybody who can possibly come and help." This is even before they fully shut down hyperspace, because we're still dealing with like initial emergencies.
Yeah.
Because they were in hyperspace before they decided to fall out of it to go divert.
Yeah. After most of the book of Light of the Jedi, we're getting to Battle of Kerr. Where...
Oh, is that when this happens?
Yeah.
Oh.
Part 2 is after the Battle of Kerr.
Oh, well, then let me get to the Battle of Kerr in the other one.
That's what I was like.
Okay. Gotcha. Caught up. Sorry. So emergencies are happening, and then they're saying, "Okay, we have got to help." So Joss and Pikka, Adrian, they go and they do their helping thing, and like actually in the book, in Light of the Jedi, and they're saving people, and Barryaga stops a giant entire cargo section that's full of people from being just blasted out of space, because that was the initial plan of just blow the things up as they're flying towards the planets, and then they won't hit the planets. Except Barryaga's like, "We're gonna have to stop one of these things because one of these things is full of people," and except he says it and it's like, or whatever. And so they stop all the things and they shut down hyperspace, and they're like, "Well, we got to deal with that." And so then Into the Dark happens before the Battle of Kerr, for the most part.
Yeah, I think so.
And so that's when you get Reath Silas and Des Rydan and Comac Vitus and Orla Jareni, who we love. They're all going to go to the Starlight Beacon dedication ceremony and everything. This is all meanwhile. And then suddenly they get pulled out of hyperspace because they're like, "Hey, we got to shut down hyperspace. Something is wrong with hyperspace and we don't know what." And so they're doing their thing. They're hanging out with a bunch of people stuck on this space station called the Amaxine Station, also known as the timeshare of one Philip J. Snoke. And And on the Maxine station, there's a ton of plants, and there's a couple of mysterious statues, and so they hang out until everything's all good and ready to go, and they're just like, we just got to keep the peace on this station between these people who clearly don't like each other, and Wreath is getting hit on by a lady, and she's like, hey, Wreath, you're really cute, and she has a really annoying voice. More on that later. And then while this is all happening, there's also an attack on a ship with ambassador and things like that going on, and Vernestra and Avon Staros and Imri Canteros and a guy named Douglas and another guy named Honesty Weft and a really, really cool droid named J6 all crash onto a planet, and they're stuck over there. And then in the comics, that doesn't that happen during?
Yes, but half the adults die, so they don't crash on the planet.
Oh, right. But they don't they crash their ship? Yeah, they can't fly it out.
The kids do.
Yeah.
Not the adults.
Oh, they crash too. They just
blew
don't.
Up.
They
didn't
blow
crash.
Up.
They just blew up.
Okay, so they crashed, but in pieces. They blew up first, then crashed. Anyway, Douglas is dead. The ambassador's dead, but Honesty and the kids, they're all still alive. And at some point in the middle of all that, Loden Greatstorm gets taken, and Bell is without a master, and we don't know what's going on with Bell. So that is all happening. That was all last episode. Then, in Light of the Jedi, happening at the exact same time, because Light of the Jedi happens basically over the entirety of Wave 1, except for this comic section that we'll get to later. Meanwhile, the Vessel and Orla and Comac and Wreath all go back to the Amaxine station, and they're like, we gotta go.
Because they went to Coruscant first.
Because they went to Coruscant, and while they were at Coruscant, the council was like, there's this problem on called the Nihil, and that's what's causing all the issues. And so they're like, yeah,
oh, interesting.
Interesting. We met a couple of people who definitely fit that description.
Yeah.
And what do their ships look like? Like a bunch of scrap all piled together, worse than the Millennium Falcon? Ooh.
I think I've seen one of those, and they were like, yeah, but I don't think so.
Yeah, Wreath, you don't know what you're talking about. And you know who says it the most? Terry Rosason, because she's a jerk. Anyway, so Wreath's like, listen, we got to go back to the Amaxine station. One, because Nan definitely doesn't actually talk like that. She's a Nihil. And two, because these statues that Orla went to go fix up don't have any dark side energy in them, which means they weren't steeped in the dark side. They were holding back the dark side.
Yep.
We got to go figure that out. So they go back to the Amaxine station, and lo and behold, there's a bunch of plants all saying meat. And the plants are alive, and the Nihil are trying to deal with them, and everyone is in chaos. And the Nihil are trying to deal with that. They put the statues, they set them all up, and they're like, cool, Drengir are going to fall asleep this way. That'll hopefully work. And then Wreath goes down to where Des Rydan got Scooby-Dooed through a door and then jettisoned into space. And it turns out that he also got Scooby-Dooed and jettisoned into space. And so he is on a hyperspace escape pod, and he lands on a planet, and Des Rydan's there, and he's like, Wreath, I'm a bad guy now because I'm poisoned and miserable. And he starts getting all angry and fighting him, and he's like, Des, it's not you. Remember, we both loved Jorah Mali, our previous master, who's really, really cool. Remember her? She was in Light of the Jedi. And he was like, I read that book. That was good stuff. You're right. Light side it is. And then he drags him off. They fight some Drengir. The Drengir keep splitting apart because they do that whole like Hydra thing. Yeah. And they get on the hyperspace escape pod and fly back to the Amaxine station. They get there, and Nan's like, what up, Wreath? Why are you being such a jerk? And he's like, aha, you don't talk like that. And then she like tells him, Wreath, if I meet you again, you're gonna die. But for now, because you were nice and we got along for a bit, I'm not gonna kill you. And so then they go off their separate ways. Wreath and Affie Hollow get together, and she's like, my foster mom is super bad, and it turns out this was a way station for a bunch of indentured servants to make their time of servitude shortened by just doing dangerous hyperspace routes, which were not properly charted and are actually super bad. So we got to go shut them down. So they go and they shut them down, and she winds up getting her foster mom arrested, and the Bind Guild gets shut down, which means the Vessel gets to be on their own. Hooray, that's great. And then Wreath gets back to Coruscant with Des, and Des is like, I got to take the Barash vow because I'm really messed up. Those Drengir really screwed with my head and have been torturing me throughout the entirety of the book ever since I got Scooby-Dooed.
And I can't totally feel the Force, and I don't know why, but I feel sort of it, but not really. But
And Wreath even says, like, hey, why are you taking the Barash vow? Like, you didn't screw up. And he's like, no, but I, like, can't feel the Force. Like, something's wrong. Yeah. So he's off doing his own exile thing, so Des can't be that, and then Wreath has to find a new master because Jorah Mali super died.
Oh, no!
Spoilers. Jorah Mali will die in the Battle of Kur, which we'll say in just a second. And so then that leads us into the Battle of Kur. There is this thing called the Battle of Kur, and effectively we figured out that the Nihil are at the root of this problem, and we're like, cool, we're gonna face off with the Nihil. And so they send in a really mean, douchey Nihil. What's his name? Kassav, that's right. So they send in Kassav, and
it's a Tempest Runner.
He was a Tempest Runner, and Tempest Runners are the highest ranking members of the Nihil at that time, before the Eye kind of usurps that role. But there are 3 of them, and underneath them are clouds, and underneath them are strikes, and they all are part of what is called a tempest. There are 3 tempests, and they are all part of the storm. And Kassav goes in, and Panada and Lorna D, who are also Tempest Runners, do not go in, because they're like, you know what, we're just gonna sit back and watch what happens. Yeah. So midway through the Battle of Kur, Nihil Markion Ro, who is the eye of the storm and kind of gives everyone their paths, is like, hey, plug these coordinates into your path engines and start fighting dirty. And then you're going to take the tide and turn it towards yourself.
Trust me, it'll work.
It'll work for surezies. And so they start putting in all their data, and suddenly they are hyperspace jumping into ships and kind of holdo maneuvering, but like almost worse and way more chaotic, and they're all doing it at random moments. Because
which also freaks the Nihil out, because Markion set them up. Yeah.
And Kassav definitely is like, do not put those coordinates into our ship. We cannot trust Markion. And Markion gives them all their coordinates, and then also tells them, like, you're Nihil, fight dirty. So they start releasing radiation that like is leaking into systems, and all manner of just absolutely dirty tactics. And the Jedi kind of know how to handle it, because they at least are all kind of on that same wavelength because of the battle meditation. But the rest of the normal folk who aren't force sensitive start just getting their butts handed to them.
Because they can't deal with this randomness.
No, they have no idea how to deal with this chaos, but that is what the Nihil are. They're chaos. They're chaos incarnate. So the pilots are all like dying left and right, and it's going really, really bad, but the vectors are somewhat still alive. But is it one ship or 2 ships? I think it's one ship. They're in a ship together. But one particular couple of people are making it, and that's Joss and Pikka Adren.
Yes, it is.
And Joss and Pikka Adren are basically, they hack their system. They do a little fancy schmancy work to get their ship to be able to handle what's going on, and then they survive and start taking people out. Meanwhile, Kassav's like, well, I guess I'm just going to surrender to whoever shows up on the ship. And he's like, hey, I surrender, and I have information about the Nihil. And the guy who takes him out is related to the planet that Kassav sort of held hostage and then accidentally didn't save when they paid him. And so he's like, yeah, fat chance, buddy. And he's dead. Little pew pew, and Kassav's gone. Yeah. Which means one less thing to worry about for Markion Ro. One less thing to worry about. It's a Hamilton reference. Anyway, while that's all happening, Joss and Pikka Adren show up, and what happens, Brian? Go!
They are some of the only non-Jedi that are able to figure out, or at least fight back against the Nihil as they're doing all this stuff. And
right, because everybody who's not a Jedi is basically just being slaughtered.
Yeah. And Avar Kriss is using her cool battle meditation to kind of link all the Jedi together so they're better organized and they can
help each other
out. Yeah, good stuff. And
it doesn't work for everybody, though, because Skier loses an arm. And
people die.
And Jorah Mali dies.
Yeah.
So it's not saving all the Jedi. No. But there's these 2 civilians who have managed to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah. They help out. Battle ends.
Okay, so they help out. They figure out how to avoid all the things that the...
Yeah, but then also they know how to kind of flip it around and just attack the Nihil as they're doing all this.
So they're not just surviving. They're actually like a major part of this battle, making it work.
Yeah, almost a turning point.
Nice.
Yeah. So Battle of Kur finishes. There's heavy losses on both sides, but it kind of seems like the Republic and the Jedi won.
Yeah, and Kassav is dead, and they don't understand how big the Nihil are, so they're like, ha ha ha, this was a huge blow. Meanwhile, over in Test of Courage, which is the book about Vertnester Ro and Honesty Weft and Avon Staros and Imri Kantaros and J6, they're all stuck on a planet, and the planet has acid rain, and it's rough, and then they meet some Nihil who are responsible for the whole ship blowing up, and so they're really, like, they're like, we got to deal with it. And Emery's like, I'm going to take these guys out. We're going to murder them.
Yeah.
And he's
and
like,
honestly, he's like, yeah, we totally should. They killed our father figures. And he's like, yeah, they did.
And so Emery goes kind of dark side for a hot second, and Vernestra Rowe, who is actually one of the youngest knights in Generations, is like, hey, Emery, knock it off. And he's like, no, I'm a bad guy now. I murder people. And she's like, you've murdered no one. Shut the heck up. Because they got caught the first time he attempted to do the murder. He just gets caught and tied up.
Yeah.
Like, it does not go well.
Yeah.
So she's like, first of all, you're not even good enough to murder. Second of all, you're not a bad guy. You're just mad. Yeah. It's okay to be upset.
It's cool.
It's okay to be upset.
Understandably.
And he's like, it's not okay to be upset. Jedi don't get upset. And she's like, they also don't murder people, but you're into that. So can you not? Can you not?
Well, they eventually fight, and then
they do fight.
Vernestra breaks his lightsaber because she's like, no, we're done with this.
Yeah, and then Keeve and Skier have just gone and done their Keeve's Jedi trials, which she screwed up because she didn't get all the way up to the top of the aggro crag, which is not what it's actually called. That's just a reference to Nickelodeon's Global Guts. So they get to the top of it. She doesn't get to the top of the aggro crag because Pixie comes in and is like, hey, there's some giant bugs and they're going to take out all of our village. And she's like, well, I better save the village from the bugs. And so she calls up to Astalamaru. Good. That's what I thought it was. Astalamaru and she's like, Astalamaru, you got to change the beacon because it's like sending a signal and these bugs are migrating weird because of it. And he's like, whoopsies. And then he changes it and then everything's set up. Cool. And the Battle of Kur has happened. Let's have our dedication ceremony finally. And in case you were wondering, Kai Brightstar and Nubs and Yoda and what is that girl's name?
Liz.
And Liz are also at the dedication ceremony.
They are.
They've gone and done all their fun times, and if you want to watch that, that's the Young Jedi Adventures. Yep. We just threw that in there.
Yep.
Anyway,
fun aside, it was just renewed for season 2 and it airs in August.
Woo!
I don't know where it's going to go because we know where the rest of the story goes, and it's all there. It'll be fun. Kid show. Yay.
So then they have the Starlight dedication ceremony.
Yeah.
And the Starlight Beacon is dedicated, and everybody parties, everybody drinks, and that's when Go Together 2, Part 2 happens.
Yes. And so that's kind of when this next story, Part 2 of Go Together, comes in. So after the battle of Kur, the Adrians return to Starlight Beacon, and they're like,
no,
they can't get
have
away.
To go back to work.
Yeah. And
sorry, you gotta go hang out at the office for a little while longer.
Basically. And so they get called in for a debriefing. And they're like, we've done a debriefing. We've done multiple debriefings. Like, what more do they want? They have all this computer data from the fight. They have all the Jedi. Why do they want to talk to us? Are we in trouble? Or what's going on? So this council was Chancellor Lena So, Avar Chris, Kronara, a senator, and a couple other government officials. And they're like, I guess we'll go to this meeting. I don't know why, but they're also exhausted and maybe slightly hungover because they're partying because of the dedication ceremony.
Oh.
This is like the day after, basically. So they're exhausted. They're probably slightly hungover. And they're like, I don't know what else we could tell you. Kronara brings up this hologram, and it kind of shows what was going on while the Nihil were attacking and what they were doing, and it kind of caught them off guard because they're like, we don't want to relive this. This was like pretty traumatic, but okay, we'll just go with it for now. So they were like, look at you guys. You're clearly doing something that's keeping you safe, but also like you're attacking and you're doing damage. What did you guys do? How did you guys do it? And of course they were like, we totally used the Force.
The Force. Because like maybe we used the Force. You don't know.
Yeah. And then Avar's like, yeah, everything has the Force. You did not use the Force. Like, come on.
Okay.
So basically, they were like, hey, like we're engineers, we're pilots, we know how ships work, we know how these systems work. We kind of hacked the military systems and
we made illegal modifications and hot rodded out our cars.
Literally, that's what they did. Like mid-flight, they're like, well, we can get around these safeguards and these firewalls that'll let the engines do something different, and we can pair these other things together. Basically, they broke a bunch of laws in quotes.
They broke protocol a lot.
Yeah. But it was kind of cool the way they were explaining it, because Pikka knew that Joss is a great pilot and knew her way around systems. So it was a joint effort between the both of them, and they were able to basically just use their skills together like a wonderful married couple does. And just that's how they held their own. And so
couple goals for sure. Relationship goals for 100%. Sure.
Yeah. And so they were dismissed. They're like, that, I guess that makes sense. We're kind of miffed that you broke protocol and you like messed with our ships, but okay, that clears things up.
I mean, how miffed can you possibly be? Like,
right?
I feel like if they're miffed at all, it's them being,
how did they outsmart
crap
us?
They outsmarted us, and if we didn't have those protocols in place, like,
we could have done better.
Maybe we could have done better, you know. It's a
so eventually they go back to their rooms, they get some food, and they kind of calm down after this surprise meeting.
Greasy food for sure.
Oh yeah.
Definitely greasy food. That helps.
A couple burritos.
Definitely a breakfast burrito.
Like a Ronto breakfast burrito, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'm hungry.
Yeah. And then eventually Admiral Kronara comes and visits them, and she's like, "Hey, we're putting together a task force to hunt down any remaining Nihil and get more information, because we know that we didn't defeat them all, but we also don't know anything. So we need people who's dealt with them and that can fight them if we do find them." And she offered them the job due to their skills and all that kind of stuff. And they were like, well, and Pikka was like, well, I don't think so. Like, we just planned a 2-week vacation. We're exhausted. This has been a thing. I'd rather not.
We just want to go on vacation.
Yeah. Like, just
just let us go have a break.
Yeah. And so Kronara was like, fine, we'll see you in 2 weeks. So basically, kind of a compromise. Like, we're not taking no for an answer, but go have your vacation.
I mean, it's not even, whoops. It's not even like a, oh, but we really want a vacation. Like, Pikka straight up says, no.
Yeah.
No. My husband and I had a vacation plan for when we finished our work building this station, and then we got caught up in all this Nihil business, and it's been nonstop ever since. We deserve a break. And then she folds her arms and looks her in, like, you're looking down Admiral Kronara.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, absolutely not. I don't work for you.
Yeah.
I'm not military.
You're not my mom.
But also, like, she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Like, no, you can't just deputize us.
Right.
Like, we don't have to accept that right now. And then she said, so we want our 2 weeks on Amphar, sun, sand, no fighting. But after that, I think we can do what you're asking. And Joss goes, we can? And she goes, don't you think? And then he goes, yeah, I guess I do. And then Admiral Kronara says, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like you were underselling just how badass Pikka is.
Yeah,
like, she's just like,
my
absolutely
bad.
not.
Yeah.
Like, I am not doing this right now.
Yeah.
Let me go hang out at the beach.
Which is, I'm excited for this couple moving forward, because they do show up in and around some of the books and some of the other short stories.
They don't show up like at all in Wave 2, which was a bit of a bummer, because when they showed up in Wave 3, I was like, I don't know who these people are. They seem familiar. And when I finally realized it, I was like,
oh yeah,
these guys. I love these guys. They're so smart.
Yeah.
So, okay, so over in High Republic Adventures, on a much slower, less last time, or that's what you missed on Glee form, the dedication ceremony has happened. Lula Talasola and Zine are now like meditating together, and Zine has been invited to stay on the temple portion of Starlight Beacon, and they're going to live there now. So Lula Talasola and Zine and Farzala and Court, they all live on the station. And Avar has now been made the Marshal of Starlight Beacon. So she now lives on the station. Astalamaru is there, and the Nihil threat, whether it's that big of a threat or not, is being handled by the council's taking care of it. And Yoda has been like, hey, you're going to have to take over. And Joramali's seat on the council has now been taken by Stellan. And Stellan Gios is now a council member, which is perfect for him because he's kind of a bit of a rule follower to a fault. He can be a little Mace Windu-y in that regard.
Yeah.
But Lula and Zine are now palling around together, and Buckets is there. And they're basically just kind of living life, but what they're waiting for is for Crix to get back to Zine, because Crix was given that communicator by Yoda. In the last episode, we talked about this a little bit. And Yoda gave him a communicator and was like, hey, take this and get the heck out of here. And so Crix, because he refused to be saved, just went up and is now with the Nihil. And Yoda was kind of scheming a little bit. By giving him a communicator, he also was giving him a tracking device. And so Crix is watching and rewatching this video message, this holo message of Zine being like, look, I know I lied to you, but like, look how y'all reacted. Mm-hmm. You know, we've been taught our whole lives that the Force is bad, but like all these Jedi are super cool. So I don't know, I'm sorry, but like, whatever. And Crix is like, look, you ditch the Jedi and like I'll come get you and we'll get out of here and we won't have to deal with Nihil. We'll just run away together, you know, and we'll be on our own. It's very much that like, forget the Jedi, forget the Sith. Yeah. Let's just be friends now. That was my impression of Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi.
Except he's still mad that she lied to him because they're supposed to be BFFs.
Yeah, he's still mad, but he's also like, look, just ditch him.
Yeah.
And Zine's like, this is the only group of people who has ever known who I am and loved me anyway and not made me hide who I am. I'm kind of dealing with a found family situation, and you're still mad at me for like not telling you a thing that you got mad when you found out about.
Yeah. And the cool thing about the Jedi taking her in is they're not going to train her as a Jedi, but they're going to let her they're going to show her meditation stuff and just some basic low-level Force things because they do see her Force sensitivity, and she is pretty strong.
Yeah.
But again, she's too old to be a Jedi, so they're like, just come meditate with us. We'll show you a few things here and there, but, you know.
We're going to teach you how to control it, but we're not going to teach you how to become like a stoic warrior Jedi because you have attachments, which means that strengthening your bond with the Force, it's not the same thing as having you understand your connection to the Force. Exactly. You know.
But we're still going to keep you around because you know Crix, and Crix is all up in the Nihil, so...
Yeah. And she kind of feels that way too. Like, I'm here because I am a strategic element.
Yeah.
You know.
And she wants to do her part to help as well, because she's seen what the Nihil do firsthand.
Yeah. So meanwhile, while that's all happening, Crix is on the ship, and he and Tromac, who is from the Elders of the Path, and he's a Gran, which means he's that species with 3 eyeballs on stalks that have a sort of cow-like mouth. And they're kind of just doing their best to survive among these marauders, but he's kind of guiding Crix, saying, look, I know things that the Nihil really can't know. I have information that they are not supposed to have, so we got like it's been with me for the longest time. And Crix is like, what is it? And he's like, I don't want to tell anybody. And Crix is like, right, but this is knowledge from our religion cult. This is knowledge from our religion. If something happens to you, who else knows? And he's like, you're right. Okay, there's this thing on this specific planet that the Nihil can't know is there. And Crix is like, cool, I will keep this information secret. Thank you, Master Tromac, for trusting me. And then he messages Zine back, and now the Jedi have a tracking, beacon, and they're like, cool, we know where the Nihil are. So they find the communicator, and they're like, all right, Tromac, all right, Crix, one of you guys had a communicator. And Crix is like, he did. I saw him talking on it at night. And Tromac's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Crix, what are you doing? And Markion's like, cool. Tromac, because it's your communicator, we're going to feed you to the Boggaranth. And Tromac manages to ride the Boggaranth somehow, and they escape on the Boggaranths. So Tromac has gotten away, and then Markion is like, hey, I know that communicator was yours. I'm not stupid, but respect for selling out the old guy. Do you happen to know the information he knows? And he's like, oh yeah, I know the information he knows. And he's like, cool, you are gonna be a Nihil then. But the problem is that communicator you had also had a tracking device, which means the Jedi know we're here. You're gonna keep on talking to them and pretending like you don't know so that the Jedi can find us. Meanwhile, the Jedi are like, hey, Zine, you're gonna have to keep on talking to them so that we can find them. And they're like, cool, so since we know there's a tracking device on this thing, we are going to spring a trap on them. So they go to this trash planet. There's all these bird things there, and Zine goes off on her own because she's like, Crix is my problem, I'm gonna take care of it. So she steals a Vector, which are still really hard to fly anyway, especially for a kid who doesn't know. And lo and behold, she winds up crashing it. She crashes it because Crix shoots her down. And he gets to her, and he's like, what the heck, it was you? And she's like, you shot me down? And they have their kind of moment or whatever, fighting each other. There's a big old fight, and they wind up spotting that Yoda's in the crowd, Tromac has managed to survive with the Bogranth, finds Yoda and is like, hey, I know who you are. I remember you from before. Like back,
like 150 years ago.
150 years ago or so, approximately, give or take. And Yoda's like, oh, yeah, no, okay, that makes sense. And he's like, cool, I need to show you something. We have to go now. And so Yoda's like, hey, I'm peacing out. Don't follow me.
Yeah.
Because he tells him, you can't bring, like, it's you. You're the only one I trust. And so Tromac and Yoda duck out and leave. And then Buckets and Cantum Sai are like, well, Yoda pieced out. I assume he knows what he's doing. And then the Nihil are like, we got what we needed from this place, so we're going to peace out. And then they leave. And at the very end of all that, Zine is basically like, okay, cool. I will live on the Starlight Beacon officially. Like I'm not going anywhere. And they're like, good, because we like you, and you're gonna start hanging out and palling around with us, like more than you were already. Like this isn't a temporary thing. Like you live here now. We're family. Family. And then while that's happening, Crix and Markion are going to this rando planet, and Yoda and Tromac are also trying to get to that planet. But Markion and Crix got there first, and they set up mines, and one of the mines winds up taking out Yoda and Tromac's ship. They crash land, and nobody knows where Yoda went, so Yoda can't even call for help. So Yoda's stranded on a planet somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that's the last we're going to see Yoda for pretty much the rest of Phase 1.
Yeah.
And then Crix and Markion get to what they're looking for, and they don't reveal what it was, but it's very important, and they managed to get to it before Yoda could because Yoda crashed. So here we are.
Yeah.
So that's what you missed in High Republic Adventures. That's the end of Wave 1 for High Republic Adventures.
Yeah.
Then we jump back to Starlight Stories with our introduction to Velko Jayan and the Mon Calamari named Chief Tarpfin. Velko is a Soykin, which means she's got like really cool like silvery blue skin. Yeah. And they're both security on the Starlight Beacon. And I thought this was so cool, for the record.
Yeah.
Like those stories were so neat because they were kind of self-contained, but also really spoke to the mindset of what was going on the station, as well as what was going on in the galaxy regarding things like Nihil, regarding the Jedi, like what public opinion was. Yeah. You kind of all get it through these security guys, because anytime there's a problem, anytime there's an argument, anytime there's a fight, anytime a random Drengir decides to start sprouting up on the Starlight Beacon, mm-hmm. Tarpfin and or Velko will wind up being there to deal with it.
Yeah.
Which is a really cool outsider perspective that I thought was genius on the part of the Project Luminous people. This particular story is basically all about her very first time there. So the first story is basically her having to deal with a scuffle between a couple of dignitary types. But a Stalamaru does show up, and that's pretty cool, because it also talks about how this entire section is like, because of how many people were displaced by the Great Disaster, you're seeing a lot of people who aren't supposed to be in contact with each other still trying to like make territorial claims, and you're not supposed to be in our area. And Stalamaru points out, well, the Great Disaster didn't really pay attention to political boundaries. So sorry.
That's why I love Stala.
Yeah. But he's like, this isn't something, look, the station has to keep running, because while Avar Kriss may be the marshal of Starlight Beacon, the one running the show, the man in the chair, so to speak, he's floating in space, or he's floating in the air, is a Stalamaru, which is really cool. But Velko deals with the issue, etc., etc. Then in the next issue, which is also this is a Cavan Scott story, for the record. The next issue is an assassination attempt that Velko has to resolve. Mm-hmm. And there's all these people. Oh, this is with the robots.
The robot.
Yeah, and somebody gets almost killed, and they manage to survive. There's like an explosion on the thing, and she's going around, and Velko, being the smart detective that she is, realizes that something's not quite right here. And so she starts looking into it a little bit further, and because she's, again, an outsider, she has to remain impartial, which is really neat too, because everybody kind of you start to see who has what predispositions toward blame and tensions between various people from various planets. And she realizes that the person who was almost assassinated was not almost assassinated, but faked their assassination. Velko and Tarpfin both show up in the main storylines as well. They do wind up becoming kind of a bigger part of that.
Yeah.
Even in phase 1. So it's really cool to kind of get their introduction, even though they don't play a huge part. They do play somewhat, and they do have a really good understanding. They're good at their jobs.
Very.
Which means if people start to notice how good they are at their jobs, that might become somewhat of an issue. But she kind of has, I wouldn't say it was a friendly relationship with Tarpfin.
Yeah.
But she has a genuine respect from her and for her, which is really cool. And Tarpfin has some really cool history that comes up later regarding her relation, why she's so good at what she does and why she's not working directly for them on Calamari, which is very cool. So more on that later. So at the very end of the whole thing, after she's foiled the plot and we realize that the person was not being assassinated, but they were in fact just doing it to cause issue and saying that they were a victim when they really weren't, because they had nefarious other plans. We go to the High Republic, issue number 2. And this is kind of the rest of Wave 1 happens during the comic The High Republic.
Definitely.
So you got Sarek and Tarek, whose names are a palindrome.
Oh, yeah.
And they are twins who basically share the same mind.
Yeah.
And because they are never separated and because they are effectively two people as one, they are always referred to as they because they are part of each other, which is kind of cool. And then Skier and Keeve, who is now a Jedi Knight, who has been knighted by Avar Chris herself.
Oh, yeah.
So High Republic issue number 2 starts with Sarek and Tarek and Keeve Trennis and Skier all on a trip to go answer a distress call in Republic space where they are allowed to do. So it's not like they're out on the frontier or anything. Right. Mind you, I will remind you that Republic space is not the same as you might know it already, because the Republic is still in a time of expansion at this time.
Yeah, they're a little smaller than, say, during, Skywalker Saga, Clone Wars.
Yeah, so we're not maybe reaching all the way out to, like, Naboo.
But they are in the Republic, but it's still... That's one of the few planets that far out that is in the Republic at this time.
Yeah. So they're on their way, and Sarek and Tarek are twins that are connected through the Force. They're not like the dyad in the Force situation. It might be related to their species. It's not entirely known.
Yeah. I think
they're
it's
humanoid.
A little bit of column B, where they're Kotabi bond twins, but also because they're so strong in the Force, it just strengthens that bond anyways.
So if one is happening to one, one's happening to the other. So they're basically they act kind of as a radio between each other in some ways because of how strong their connection is, which is really cool. Skier is, currently sans his arm because he lost it in the Battle of Kur, and they get onto the ship, and there's Weequay and Gamorreans and all of these people strewn about, and in the middle there is one big dead hut. Yeah. And it is a 2-page spread, and it is beautiful. And Indeedo really just...
Oh, his artwork's great.
Incredible. So they get there, they're pretty horrified, the droids are messed up.
They notice that there's also this kind of poison gas that's around.
Yeah.
And they realize, oh, this is what the Nihil use.
Yeah.
This
and Skier's pretty upset.
Yeah. It's like, this is probably a Nihil attack.
The corpse shows the first signs of Nagnol poisoning, which is the same gas that disrupts ship sensors, and it happens to be fatal to huts in large doses. It's part of the whole smoke screen fog of war that the Nihil use. And the huts were transporting some sort of grain. They had some sort of grain, they were doing some sort of trade with grain, which is really interesting because in the Republic, there happens to be a planet that is almost exclusively dealing in grain, and that grain is refined and used to make Bacta.
Yeah, it is.
And the Nihil, who are currently using one Mari Santeca to navigate and do all these path engine calculations, need to keep her alive, and are doing so by having her basically constantly in a tube of Bacta, entirely in a Bacta tank.
Kind of like Boba Fett.
Kind of like Boba Fett is every day, at the end of the day while he's still healing up after his time with the Tusken Raiders. And Bacta, again, is new in the Republic. Yep. So they're dealing in what is, like, it's clear that the Hutts were probably smuggling this,
Oh yeah.
which is during a time when excessive Bacta is needed for all the injuries and things
yeah.
that have happened because of the great emergences. So the Hutts aren't necessarily on the up and up in this case either, but the Nihil have clearly taken it. Skier keeps on making these references to the Nihil being like wolves and like animals, and it's like, hey, like we don't call them that. And Avar gets on his case quite a bit for doing that, for like referring to them as animals and hunting like dogs, that kind of thing. And then one comes out and tries to attack, and Skier, who is upset at seeing all this carnage and already has his own beef with the Nihil given his missing arm, straight up just chops this Nihil in half.
Yeah, but then he keeps chopping him.
Oh yeah, he does. You're right. He's just mutilating that body. So he's screaming at him and he's chopping him up, and Keeve's like, there was no way to disarm. And he's like, oh, really? We're going to use that word? Disarm? No, Skier actually is like, disarm the coward. And they're all kind of like, yeah, that would probably have been a good idea, but I guess if you say so. So we're doing some detective work. I like that. I don't like when people refer to the Jedi as cops, because I don't really feel like they are cops, but I do feel that they are detectives.
Yeah.
Like, they're not out here like policing in the same way that they are like solving crimes for the most part. Maybe they become a little bit more policey as time goes on, but at least at this time, this is much more detective work. We're trying to figure out how these people were murdered, how this hut was murdered. And they know that Sedri Minor is where the ship came from, so they're like, cool, let's go see what they were doing.
So Avar sends Skier and Sarek to Sedri Minor, while the other Jedi wait on the ship for Avar herself and Vern to come and help recover the ship.
Vern! Okay, so they get to the ship, and they leave one of the twins.
Yes.
Tarek.
Yeah.
So Tarek stays on the ship. Sarek goes down to the planet with Skier, and while they're walking through the grain, a vine comes out and snatches Sarek away. And that's basically issue 2, which this is all of the, this is all that's left in this first wave. But as it happens, Tarek is losing his mind on the other ship, and they've made it back to their other ship, and they're gonna come down and meet them also on Sedri Minor. So they go their way to Sedri Minor, and they get there, and while they're looking for Skier and Sarek, Tarek is losing his mind, and he starts saying really creepy stuff about how they've already lost. It must feed. It must be fed. It must be nourished.
The darkness grows.
The darkness grows, and because they've got this connection to each other.
Yeah. And Avar's like, yo, you got to calm down. Everything's fine.
And then Keeve starts walking around, and she starts talking to people, and the locals are like, our kids keep going missing. We're missing kids, we're missing teenagers, like people are going missing. And there's this sketchy other guy who's like, I speak for the community. I'm basically the mayor.
Yeah, he's like, we don't want any other government around. We don't want the Republic pushing us around. We don't want the Hutts pushing us around. We're our own thing.
Yeah. So a youngling comes over to Keeve and is like, listen, I know where the kids are going missing. Like, I'll help you out. And the adults are like, we got to listen to the big guy, so we'll just listen to the big guy. And the kid, of course, is like, nah, we got this. And so the kid jumps into the hole. Keeve stops him from falling to his death. And she's like, why would you do that? And he's like, you're a Jedi, right? She's like, okay, kid. So they go into the cave while Tarek is like comatose. So Imri and Vern start doing an autopsy with Estella Maru on the big dead hut. And while that's going on, they wind up finding Sarek, and Sarek, as well as a couple of other people, have all been captured and have vines going into their noses and ears and eyeball holes. They are all infected with Drengir, and the Drengir are speaking through them because they have a connection to the Force, because they're super evil dark Force using plants. They're all saying that, you're not safe, etc., etc., etc.
But it's cool because this is our first visual appearance of the Drengir.
Yeah,
besides any covers that came out for.
Yeah, there's a couple of variant covers that showed up.
But it's the comic book issue number 3.
Issue number 3. They do appear on a variant of issue. It says number 1 variant.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, issue number 1.
Oh yeah, no, they label them. Okay, there's number 2 variant. There's the number 1 variant with the 2. Nihil.
That's a really cool cover.
Yeah, it is. Oh, they got the statues. The Stormbreakers variant. Sick. Okay, cool. Sorry.
That's a lot more variants I need to collect.
So the Drengir are officially like in the comic, not just variants, but they're actually showing up in the actual comics. And while that's happening, Tarek on the ship is back with Skier. Skier is trying to check up on him, and they're still connected. And they launch a swarm of some sort of nasty dark cloud.
Yeah, they almost
stuff.
like spores.
They look like spores.
Which makes sense for the Drengir.
Did you ever see the Green Mile? Yeah. When after John Coffey takes the disease and then like spits it out, it looks a lot like that.
Pretty much.
And it gets all up in Skier's face, and then Tarek says, "Poor Jedi, so lost and alone. Come with us, Skier." And then the Drengir are fighting with Keeve and Avar, and she's freeing all the kids. And Sarah is taking the little boy that led Keeve there in the first place. Everything, it's chaos. It's all chaos. Yeah. And then Avar convinces Sarah to let the kid go and is like, "Come back to the light." Sarah's like, I can't. Like, they're too strong.
You're glossing over something very big.
What big?
Avar came crashing down and cut the Drengir in half.
That's fair. Avar comes crashing through the ceiling and rides that Peter Pan on the sail style all the way down through the Drengir's body.
It's such a cool spot.
And chops it entirely in half. And then now there's two because hydrologic. And so it grows extra parts, and now we have two giant Drengir monsters.
Instead of the big one.
And walking up between them is one Philip J. Skier. is Skier, and Skier says, "The harvests will be bountiful, the harvest will be pure."
So he's out of control.
So he's now being controlled, and then that takes us into the Song of the Drengir, issue number 4.
Oh, yeah, I have that one.
Nice. Oh, you have the statues, the Stormbreaker variant.
Yeah, got that at WonderCon. That's why I didn't totally recognize it, because it's new.
So it opens up, so issue number 4 opens up with a flashback to Keeve, and they are at Kirima, which is where the Jedi go to throw their Padawans off cliffs. Mm-hmm. And this planet actually comes up more than once.
Yeah.
And where they're like, okay, you're going to jump from here to here. This is how you learn how to force jump, and don't fall down. And if they do, they catch them. And they're like, yep, you got to trust that, like, you're going to make it. And then Keeve runs, and then she jumps, and she doesn't make it. And Skier comes back and is like, all right, let's try it again. And she's like, "I'm really sorry, I tried." And he's like, Don't say sorry. Don't apologize. There's no shortcuts on Light's path. We strive. We repeat. We succeed. So smash cut back to what's going on in the cave, and they're all captured now. Tarek's still on the ship, but Sarah and the little boy and Avar and Keeve, they're all upside down, cocoon status, and Skier is looking at him, and then we start communicating with the Drengir, and the Drengir say through Skier, "The Drengir must feed, Marshal. We must feed." And she's like, "Oh yeah, this is how you're going to do that? Is this why you cut yourself off from the Force? Is this why I don't hear your song?" Because he's having issue with the Force. And he says, "You'll talk too much. You'll be silenced." And so a vine goes over her face. And he says, "Once the Drengir spread across the galaxy, feasting on flesh and bone wherever it was found. The harvest was abundant. The harvest was plentiful." And then it shows us some Sith.
Yeah.
And it says, "Others saw our power and reaped alongside us, working together for the greatest gain, but nothing lasts forever. And soon they betrayed us as it was their nature." Soon they paid the price. And so the Sith that tried to betray this Drengir got swallowed up. Fearing what they could not kill, they plotted against us. And then it says they trapped the first of us within their Force totems. And it shows us the statues from Into the Dark.
Yeah.
And
at least
while
bigger versions of the statues. These things are massive.
Yeah.
Which I think...
those might be them, because they had to use all of their Force power to get them out. There's 4 of them right there.
Yeah. For some reason, I didn't realize how big they were.
Yeah, these things are huge. And you can see a whole cult of people around. Yeah. So this is like pre-Rule of 2. Mm-hmm. And while the Great Progenitor slept, this is the first time we're even hearing about this thing, the Great Progenitor. While the Great Progenitor slept, we also slept beneath the ground, until travels stumbled upon the Progenitor, waking her from her slumber.
Then you see Wreath.
And we see Wreath and possibly Dez.
Looks like
maybe Orla or Comac, but definitely Wreath walking up amongst the Drengir.
Yeah. It looks like the statues those could be statues, just overgrown with moss and vines.
Meanwhile, on the Starlight Beacon, he says that it woke them all. Archivist Orbelin, who I adore.
So good.
Orbelin is a sentient cloud.
Yeah, gas bubble cloud.
Yeah, he is in a suit that he controls using the Force, but it allows him to have physical like connection with things and limbs and things like that. Kind of like the sentient fart from Rick and Morty.
Yeah. But he's in this really cool spacesuit that are in Jedi colors.
Yeah.
Jedi robe colors.
Jedi robe colors.
Yeah.
So he's in like the Jedi robe version of a spacesuit, and it looks so cool. It's opulent. It's very Art Nouveau. It's got all the opulence and ornateness of High Republic robes, High Republic lightsabers, but it's a spacesuit. Which is super cool. And he's there. They're in the middle of doing their autopsy, and Vern and Imri are both there, and then they start noticing that something is alive in the Hutt body, and they're like, there's no way. Is the Hutt alive? And then Orbelin says, no, it's not alive. The cadaver is infested. He says, I believe our quarantine measures are about to be tested to their limits. So that's all happening, and that's
on the beacon.
On the beacon, that's actually, I think, in Hidden Danger. That's probably happening simultaneously,
if not just after.
because this is when they're all waking up.
Yeah.
So now the Drengir are starting to wake up all over the galaxy, like more so than they already were. Meanwhile, they're pleading with Skier, and they're like whatever they've promised you, like it's not worth it. And Skier has a full arm now made of plant material that has taken over where his other arm used to be. So Skier's got this whole like arm that's made of plants now, and he's like, that's the thing, is it wasn't exactly what they offered me on purpose. It's what they offered me by connecting to me in the first place. And now that he's got this stronger connection to the Force with the Drengir, he uses that and starts Force throwing them all over the place and kicking their ass.
Yeah. He's like, I had to get in there to get their weakness, to get to know them.
So I sacrificed my own mind, sort of, but I'm actually pretty in control here. And so he takes it back, and they all start taking out Drengir left and right.
Yeah,
they all got together and teamed up and killed it.
Yeah. Cut it so much that it couldn't replicate itself again.
Meanwhile, the citizens are going to that mayor guy, and they're like, hey, why are you running off with all your money? Because it turns out he was working with the Hutts, but also was ignoring the fact that the Drengir had taken root, and he wouldn't tell the people that he knew that. And they were like, what's a Drengir? And he's like, it's a terrible danger. And then Osalamar was like, hey, Starlight Beacon's kind of under attack right now, because the Drengir have broken out of the dead Hutt's body and are now fighting on the beacon. And then as they're leaving the jerk mayor guy house, they notice a big platform is lowering down on a ship that looks like it's owned by Bowser.
Yeah.
And on that ship is a fully armored, including mechanical arms, Hutt with 2 Rancor on either side of her, being ridden by Gamorreans.
Yeah.
And she says, rejoice, wretched creatures. Your planet is now the property of the glorious Hutt cartel. And then in the final issue, there is a fight, and the
Hutts are attacking.
Oh yeah, the Hutts just start attacking the Jedi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they, at the end of issue 4, Skier's also like, Keeve, bust out your lightsaber. And she's like, why are we expecting a fight? And that's when we flip the page and we see Gamorreans riding the Rancor.
Oh yeah. Okay, so they've lit the lightsabers as soon as they see that the Hutts have shown up, and they're off. They start fighting, and the Rancor are doing Rancor stuff, and it's so cool. They're smashing people, and everybody's been freed of the Drengir from being trapped in there. So the lightsabers are busted out. They immediately start firing upon the Jedi. The Jedi are like, we have to protect the people because they're shooting willy-nilly at us. Tarek and Sarek are reunited, and they are fighting against the Rancor, and the Rancor are doing super cool stuff, and then the Hutts are doing cool stuff.
But at the same time, we flash over to the Starlight Beacon, and Vern and Imri are fighting off the Drengir on the Starlight Beacon. Stalamaru's in the background, kicking some ass.
Yeah. And then Skier uses his new Drengir arm, and Go-Go Gadget grabs the Hutt, and they're having their fight. And then Tarek and Sarah wind up putting Rancor to sleep. And then finally, Keeve's like, you're not in control. Like, this isn't controlled fighting. You've got to stop. And she chops his Drengir arm off. As soon as that happens, he starts speaking with the, well, I mean, it's in the comic, it's a black bubble so that you can determine that that's what it is. But he starts speaking with the Drengir voice. And she says, like, you don't have to do this on your own. And he's like,
they don't understand. This is beyond their comprehension. Here is another stupid meat. Did you think severing the roots would stop us?
And she's like, well, I kind of hoped. And he's like, well, then you proved my point. You do not deserve to live. And so they're fighting. And then the money grubbing guy, he gets beat up by the families that have lost loved ones.
Yeah.
And he tries to make his escape. And then
the Rancor crashes in.
The Rancor just barges right through. And Keeve is like, I'm not giving up on you, Skier. And Skier's like, Skier's gone. You know, there is only Zool. And then she basically hits him real hard.
Yeah.
And he comes to.
He's like, they still have a hold. I'm fighting back a little bit,
But she's like, yeah, you told us you needed to find out what the Drengir were planning. And he's like, well, that's not entirely it. It's been happening for a while, and I don't know why. But he's like, my connection to the Force is fading. But that swarm that attacked you in issue 1, I didn't notice it. I didn't sense it. I had no idea that it was coming. And it was the same when I should have sensed the dark side at the heart of that planet. And I couldn't do it then. And so she's like, why didn't you tell me? And he was like, I was ashamed. I let you down or something. And she's like, no, you couldn't do that. And you can really see that Keeve and Skier are, like, their bond is very close.
Yeah, they have this great connection.
And I feel like it's one of the only ones that's like that, because so many other characters in this entire story had to be cut. Like, everyone's on their second master. Yeah. Like, Imri's on his second master because Douglas is dead. Mm-hmm. Reith is on his second master. Bell is kind of on his second master because Indira Stokes has taken over for Loden Greatstorm. Spoilers if we didn't mention that in our Glee recap. So, but we really see that, like, this first Padawan, first master bond is really strong here. Yeah, much the same way with Bell and Loden Greatstorm.
Oh yeah.
But they're separated, and we don't get to see them actually really work together more than a book. And
especially this works. It's really cool seeing this because they're not Padawan master anymore. Like, she's a knight, and they just happen to be on the same mission.
So we really have only ever seen this with Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Yeah. And even then, they were off doing Clone Wars-y stuff. So, I mean, not that this isn't in the middle of a big old battle either, but it's not as extensive at this time as the Clone Wars just all of a sudden were.
And also, Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship is way more brotherly than father-son in the way that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's were. Mm-hmm. You know, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan...
much more father figure.
Yeah, it was a father figure situation, or like a benevolent uncle or something like that. You know, Dooku and Yoda, Dooku went to the dark side, so, you know, that's that. This is the first real healthy proper, because in effect, Anakin's first master was Qui-Gon.
Yeah, for, 3 days.
Yeah, like he was just like, just watch what I'm doing, just stay close. Yeah, like they're throwing a fit or whatever.
Don't think, use your instincts during the pod race.
Yeah. You know, that kind of thing. But, like, he would have been a father figure for Anakin in that way. And then Anakin loses him. Yeah. And then he has Obi-Wan, who is not that much older than him and does really treat him like a brother. Yeah. So, yeah, it's really cool. Anyway, so they keep on fighting, and the Jedi realize that there's too many. We see distress calls are coming in by the thousands about Drengir suddenly being everywhere.
Yeah, and it's cool because we see these little text bubbles pop up from the radio calls that are coming in.
And so she reroutes all the distress calls so that the Hutt can also hear them. And that's when they kind of realize that the Nal Hutta is also under an attack, and the Hutt and the Jedi have the same enemy. Yeah. So the Hutts and the Jedi combine forces, and the Hutt declares that they will be fighting with the Jedi, not just fight with the Jedi, but fight alongside them. Mm-hmm. And we see more Vern using light whip stuff, which is just awesome.
Yeah. Imri gets stabbed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's when she busts out her whip.
And then Kiev sticks her hand on Skier and is like, oh, I'll talk to them. And she talks to the Drengir through Skier, and she basically convinces them that they don't want to eat people right now because they're sick. And so everyone can get away from them because the Drengir are like, they're unclean. Yeah. They're unclean.
Yeah, we can't eat this.
We can't eat this. That's gross. Oh, gross. What is this? Banana and onion soup? And then Skier collapses, and we end wave 1 with Kiev holding her seemingly dead master in her arms, and she goes, don't you do this to me. You hear me? Don't you dare.
Don't you die on me.
And that is basically the end of wave 1.
Yeah.
Now there is one other story in the Life Day Treasury, and it is super adorable. And it's during the Coruscant solstice. Stellan is on Coruscant doing Stellan Coruscant things, and he kind of takes some time off to just go reflect and be on his own. And he sees a pickpocket, and he winds up following the pickpocket, and the pickpocket has some issues going back and forth, but it turns out, like, because he's gotten into trouble with other gangs, winds up going like down to the lower levels, 1313 status.
Ooh.
And he eventually follows the pickpocket, and he's like, you can't be doing this. And he saves him a couple of times, and they have to kind of go on the run briefly together because they're both like getting chased by these other gangsters. And eventually he comes to find out that there is the reason that this pickpocket is pickpocketing is because his mom's at home and she's not doing so hot. And so he goes and he visits them, shows up with some like food and stuff for him and like some supplies. And he kind of realizes, it's kind of a nice little moment where he realizes that this is what the Jedi need to be doing. This is who the Jedi need to be.
Like
because
helping the people on the ground?
Helping the people on the ground floor. They're right there. And
that comes up later in the Living Force book.
And so Stellan ends up basically having what is Coruscant's version of Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
And so Stellan has Christmas dinner with this pickpocket and his mom, and he's like, no more stealing, okay? And he's like, we need help. And he's like, yeah, I get it, but you need to steer clear of these gangster guys. And that's basically the story.
Oh, that's cool.
But it happens technically within the timeline of Wave 1.
Yeah. Well, we did it, guys.
We did it. That is the end of Wave 1.
Wave 1.
Which obviously was a lot.
Yeah.
But to get the full spoilery version of it, that was gonna take a while.
Right.
It only took us 4 hours?
Yeah, not too bad.
Thereabouts.
But yeah, that's, Wave 1 is just a huge setup to the rest of what's going on in the High Republic.
Yeah. So the next thing we need to talk about is basically, what does this all mean for the state of the galaxy? Where is everyone and going on through there? So we should talk about that in our next episode.
Yeah. Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Very, very cool. Love that. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Threads at the Starlight Archive podcast.
We've been very active on Threads. Check out those.
Yeah, be sure to find us on Threads. If you're not on Threads yet, I understand, but it's a good time. It's been really fun over there. Yeah. Arguably, it's where I think some of the healthiest conversation about the Acolyte has been happening. Yeah. Which has been nice.
More people are not putting up with the nonsense.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people out there, complaining this and that, and they're not tolerating about any of that nonsense over on the on Threads.
Right.
So yeah, definitely, if you're looking to exit, no pun intended, exit out of your current social media place, Threads is a pretty cool place to be. So we're enjoying it over there. So, in the words of Jedi Master Skier,
there are no shortcuts on light's path. We strive, we repeat, we succeed.
The Starlight Archive is brought to you by Bryce Rankins and Brian Romero. It was edited by Bryce Rankins and Brian Romero. Bryce Rankins designed the logo. Brian Romero did most of the research. It's produced by Bryce Rankins and Brian Romero, and basically it's just us. The Starlight Archive is brought to you by Sneaky Geek Media 2024. All rights reserved.